doctor on call was like, oh, you wanted to learn, right? So the baby's coming out, come catch the baby. And I was like, oh my God. Really, really crazy. I mean, I think now, all of these years later, I still think about the childbirth process and like, it's really intense. When you go to a hospital, you have to advocate for yourself, because if someone straps you down with lights on your face and IVs and so interventions constantly, the more fear that comes out of you, it starts it releases a lot of cortisol, right? And the more cortisol you produce, the more pain you'll experience.
Today, we have a very cool episode because we are going to be talking about midwifery, having children, babies, the way it happens in Pakistan, the art, the practice, the traditions. And I was wondering, do you have anything to input in that for personal life?
I mean, I'm very excited because I know nothing about most of these things. What I've learned from my friends having babies recently. And I don't like knowing about all of those things. But you know what? What do you know about
You know what I always say when people are talking about babies and having them? When I'm always like, you know what? As someone who only knows the perspective of the baby.
So today we have on the pod
Neha
Mankani.
Woo! Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. How you feeling?
Great.
Great. Good.
So this topic that we've invited you here to talk about, and also kind of educate us on all of it, I know nothing about, as per usual, with most episodes of this podcast. But like, this is a really interesting topic because we normally, like I said, my friends recently, lots of babies, and we always tend to go towards like the more mainstream hospitals, doctors, all of that. But you are a midwife, which, I mean, I've always heard about, read about, but I never knew anything about it. How'd you get into this?
So midwifery, really interesting story. Now that I think about it, I actually can't really remember where it started, where I decided that I wanted to be a midwife. So some of my friends say that they heard me talking about it when we were in undergrad, like 12 years ago. But I think it was actually a bit later that I started thinking about it. So I've been doing public health work, reproductive health work through my master's degree, even before that, for many years. But what I wanted always was to have a bigger footprint. And I felt like if I had a clinical skill, then maybe my footprint would be bigger and I would be able to, if I worked with women directly, I would just have a bigger footprint. And I just also really like the human interaction aspect of it. But I think just to go back a little bit, I'll talk about what midwifery is.
Yes, please.
So midwife, I think if you just break down the word, it doesn't have anything to do with anyone's wife, but it means with woman. So a midwife's role is literally to just be part of the childbirth process with women. And it's a midwife does normal obstetrics, so normal deliveries. And the role of a midwife is to be with a woman and to provide her all the services she needs in antenatal. So that's before she gives birth, during the birthing process, postpartum, that's after the birthing process, newborn care, and a bit of the childhood process with the baby as well. So, and she can do anything. So as a midwife, I can do anything in a normal delivery. But if things are complicated, then I will refer to higher level care. So that is what makes a midwife different from a doctor. Yes,
all of that,
absolutely. Yes.
But it's not uncommon today that even someone who's delivering at the hospital has a midwife present. I've seen this now that like it's almost like so what's the difference between midwife and doula, or is it the same?
No, so doula is actually supposed to provide support during birth. So they would not do the birth themselves. So they're there to kind of hold the woman's hand, to be an advocate for a woman, and a midwife is just a normal obstetrician.
Okay, got it.
So they have the technical, midwives have the technical capability of actually going through the whole birthing thing, whereas I'm assuming doula is just support.
Absolutely, yes, that's it.
You know, I feel like, I mean, we'll get into this. Me already amped up and angry. As she said, a lot of her friends have had children this year, as have mine. And it's the way it's downplayed, the entire process of having a child and what women go through. I think that that's probably one of the biggest crimes against women, like literally in history, that they're just like, it's just what they do. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm wondering, as someone who's accompany and, being a part of the birthing process in that way. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Or like, how do you, when you, maybe your first ever delivery, like, what did you think? How were your feelings during that?
I think it's, I don't know if either of you have seen a birth. It's
Yes.
quite, you've seen a birth.
So in the US where I went to high school, you are required to take health.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's the teachers pulling your leg, but they're like, you have to watch the video and they make sure you don't look away. And if you look away, you have to like take class after school and like watch it again.
Oh,
I was just curious.
Yeah.
oh, you have seen a birthing video.
Yes, I was just curious and I regretted it immediately because it is not a pleasant thing to watch.
Yeah, I literally was like
from
this.
what my friends say, it's not a pleasant thing to go through either.
Yeah.
But and I have very annoying questions that will come up later.
Yeah.
But like, just break it down for us. Like she said, like your first ever, like you getting into it and doing your going through the first ever birth.
The way
How'd
I'm
that
tense
go?
just remembering
Yeah.
it.
It's really intense. And I think, so before I became a midwife, I actually wanted to know how I felt about birth.
Yeah.
So I saw a birth and I think it was, so I'm at this facility and I was just there to observe. I just wanted to know what it looked like, whether it was my cup of tea or whatever.
Yeah.
And the doctor on call was like, oh, you wanted to learn, right? So the baby's coming out, come catch the baby. And I was like, oh my God. Really, really crazy. I mean, I think now, all of these years later, I still think about the childbirth process and like, it's really intense. Like, imagine what it takes to push to first form an entire human being.
Exactly.
And then to take that human being out.
I should have
and then
sat
have to
this
grow it.
episode out the way I'm not joking. Like, and I think this kind of like goes to our point, right? That we don't know enough about something that has literally just been assigned to us from when we are born. That bas ye hoga, but whenever I hear about birth, it's like everything in me clenches because I'm like, it's so painful.
You
But
know, one
that's-
of the most common things that you hear, and I've heard this statement a lot, where it's usually the older generation that will tell like the newer generations that are going through the process that, oh, it's just, childbirth it's a breeze. Because I mean, think about it, women all over Pakistan in the villages and all, they literally squat and the baby comes out and then they go along with their day. And I'm just like, when people make these statements, I'm like, no, you ask the rest of my friends and family what they've just been through. It's a lot.
So that's also, I think, as a midwife, I feel like that is kind of the essence of what we talk to women about. Also, that birth it's a crazy process, but it's also a magical process in many ways. And midwives, the way that they are present in birth, how they go through the birth process is very different from medicalized birth. So I know that a lot of women will opt for home births, whether that's in rural communities or it's in urban communities as well. And if you have the right setting, I think that's really, really, and the right support. So whether that's a midwife or a good obstetrician and whoever it is, or a good birth partner, it really affects how the birth process is for you. So people actually will come out saying, I had this amazing, blissful birth. And a lot of times it's been through midwives, they've been in their homes with their families or they've been in a facility where they were really well supported. Because I'll always tell, so I do some childbirth classes and I'll always tell women in the lead up to the birth that, look, when you go to a hospital, you have to advocate for yourself, because if someone straps you down with lights on your face and IVs and so interventions constantly, the more fear that comes out of you, it starts it releases a lot of cortisol, right?
Yeah.
And the more cortisol you produce, the more pain you'll experience.
Me literally producing that cortisol now while we're talking about it, years away from this. I'm like, are you still like releasing my grip? But I've heard this being spoken about before, that some women's first birth will be, painful and traumatic and this and that, and they opt to go with a midwife for birth number 2. Of course, there's like medical reasons why you might not need to. I don't mean to be like, oh, people aren't choosing that. I'm sure there's many women who want to go with a midwife and they cannot. So, but that when they do that and then they have the home birth, exactly what you're saying, it's a completely like 180 from what they experienced. And then I've seen like lectures where people are like, why are we continuing to let birth be so painful when there are other options?
So painful and also really medicalized, right?
Yeah.
And so medicalization of Pakistani society, and I mean, it's just kind of the medical industrial complex, which is not just Pakistan, it's in a lot of places. But I think this medicalization is across Pakistan. So whether you live in a village or you live in a city or wherever you live, we have become so medicalized that you'll see that people will come to our clinic. And I work at this, the clinic that I have is like a tiny clinic, is on an island off of Karachi. And people will come there and say that, oh, you know, the only way I'm going to feel better is if I get a drip. Nothing wrong. Yeah. But I need a drip to feel better. Because they have a community clinic where even if they're mildly unwell, the doctor will start pumping them with steroids. So because they're like, oh, you know, when you get these things, you immediately start feeling better.
They don't
know. So there's a lot of
medicalization
and things like that. And that is why even in Pakistan, the C-section rate is so much higher than it needs to be, because we look at, because of the way that we look at doctors and medicine and the medical system, that it's kind of something that we just want to integrate ourselves into. That the only way to have a safe birth is if you have a C-section, or, you know, if you're in this big hospital where 10 IVs are being given to you.
You know, not to like, I'll try to say this in a way that's not, you know, me violating HIPAA, not a doctor. But I know someone recently who had a C-section, and this person themselves is a doctor, and it was at the hospital that they work at, and they nearly died. Like it was, and I only mentioned that it was their hospital and their doctor because you would think there would be a level of like, well, let's be extra careful with this one. She pays our bills. But nearly died, not once, but twice on that table. Because I'll tell you, I grew up I'm a C-section baby. As I said, I speak from perspectives of babies. And my whole life, my mom was like, C-section all the way. Like, that's the way to do it. Cut that baby right out. And then to see what this person went through, I mean, harrowing. Like, it was just harrowing, and their own kind of like the betrayal of like the medical system, and what they had been told was, this is your nicely packaged, have your baby, get out and go home situation.
Exactly, and it didn't happen. Like, I think people just are not, and it's okay. Like, a layperson does not need to always know everything about. They may not have the knowledge, but I think that's why even through the women that I see through the birth process, there are things that we take for granted. The women who are about to have their first baby, so they'll have the baby, and when the placenta comes out, they're like, what's that? Because they didn't know that there was another thing in there, right? So we don't know enough.
Recently found out
that there's a placenta.
And that it's a whole separate organ.
It's a whole separate thing. And because we don't know enough, it means that, like, if I have a woman with a twin pregnancy, I will draw for her what the twin looks like. Like, does the twin have, is there 2 bags? Is there 1 bag? Is there 1 placenta, 2 placentas? Because these are things that people need to know.
And but doctors never have the time to do all of that.
Yeah, because doctors don't share it. They can get to that point where they can say that, oh, you know, so an example is, which is, like, it's just really terrible. And even talking about it just makes me so angry. But something like pelvimetry, which is something that stopped being used all over the world, and like since the 1960s, where doctors would measure women's pelvis and say that, oh, you can't have a vaginal birth, you can't have a normal birth because your pelvis is too small, your baby will get stuck. People realized, the evidence showed like maybe 50 years ago that that's not a good way to do it. Doctors in Pakistan still do that to convince women that they should have C-sections, that, oh, your baby will get stuck in your pelvis. So, and because women don't know enough and also don't know how to advocate and also not allowed to ask questions, they say that, okay, the doctor must know what's right.
So what are the questions that they should be asking?
They should be asking that, you know, or knowing that, how is the size of my body related to how the baby comes out, or like, if suppose after you've had a C-section, you can also have a normal birth if it's been the right amount of time.
Yeah.
But the doctor says, no, it's not safe. If a woman asked what are the risks, they would know that the risk is like below 3% of anything happening. And when you're in a facility, even it's lower than that. Yeah. So what are the risks? What happens? And what are the barriers for me to experience like a better kind of care, right? So because we can't ask questions, we have to deal with whatever it is that we're given.
Right. But sorry.
No, please.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but because of this, on the topic of, because everything is so, according to, geared towards hospitals and doctors, and because of all of this, and because of a lot of bad, people have gone through all kinds of experiences. Do you think that people are now turning more towards midwives and midwifery?
So it's basically, I think it's different all over the world. I think there is an understanding of the kind of care that is provided by midwives, and I think a lot of people are turning towards that care, which is great. But we also want, so how the midwifery a program is set up in Pakistan is also very interesting, because in the 1990s, the government of Pakistan said that, look, last mile health. So people who live in rural areas where they cannot, every person, we just don't have enough doctors to be able to provide, to cater to every single woman, and nor does every woman need a doctor in birth. So they said that what we're going to do is we will go into communities, and young girls who've just finished metric and inter, so they're 18 years old, they will be trained through this 2-year program. They'll get a license from the Pakistan Nursing Council, and they'll be community midwives.
Okay.
And then they'll go to community. In the community, we'll set them up with a small birthing center, or they can go to homes and they will do deliveries. But so that the way that program was designed, it was actually so that women, rural women who have no access to care, could have someone from their community providing. And the importance of community-based care just cannot be overemphasized. Things that someone who's in your community will understand about you. So it's language, it's about how, I mean, we set up some midwife-led units in all parts of Pakistan. So, and we'd see women come in, and the midwives would tell them that, oh, you know, you want to give birth squatting, you want to give birth lying down, and they were like, we don't even want to be near the bed, and they just let them give birth, whatever was the mode that they was most normal to them. They'd have their family in with them. They'd be speaking the same language. They understand their customs, and that cannot be overemphasized.
And also, I mean, if you have a family friend down the street who lives down the street,
absolutely,
as part of your community, you would automatically be a lot more chilled out and calm. But that said, do you think that these communities also would take them seriously in the case of when risks pop up? And are there any checks and balances for these young girls?
I was also going to say,
I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask both sides of the...
But also, like, we love having kids, but we treat it like such a dirty, shameful thing that's going down, that I wonder how many parents were like, no way, my daughter's not learning that.
So, I mean, I think considering you may not know that much about midwifery, that was actually a really excellent question, because this is something that we talk about all the time. That first thing that happened was that these girls are very young. So it was very hard for them to be taken seriously.
Because in theory, this
great, right?
Bachas being with bachas,
like women would come into these labor rooms and they'd look at the girl and be like, she's very young, like she's not going to be part of my birth. And then what was the competition that these midwives had? The dais. And the dai is a traditional birth attendant. She's much older. She's more, she has more mobility, because in like dark communities where there's no transport, nothing, the dai still would probably be able to get around, because she's been doing it forever.
Absolutely.
And she has,
years of experience on this kid who has been trained.
Absolutely.
Trained properly, trained through the proper way to go about it, has a certificate. The dai just has experience.
Yeah.
Who has been doing...
And then the dai would also do other things. So what we saw in these labor rooms that we had in South Punjab was that we opened this labor room, but we saw that a lot of people would come in and they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I'm not going to give birth here. And what we saw was happening was that the dai in the community, she had these vials of oxytocin. So oxytocin is a drug that stimulates contraction, so it helps the baby come out faster. But the dais were using oxytocin that they had for animals. So you give a cow oxytocin to make the cow give milk. So she was using large quantities of oxytocin to speed the baby out, but the baby would obviously not be ready to come out. So, there'd be all kinds of birth injuries and the baby would go into distress. So this is what was happening. So they were saying that, the dai gives me an injection, baby comes out in 6 hours. Over here, you're going to do, good practices. So I'm not going to stay. And so there's this thing. So she's already having to deal with the dai. And then the other issue, which I think, I'm not sure how no one ever thought of this, was that in rural areas, if you want girls who are educated to secondary school level, the quality of secondary school education is so poor that these girls would get to midwifery school. And what is midwifery? It's all about, a lot of it is about your education, but it's also about your judgment, right? So reasoning, judgment. And a lot of them had gone to schools where they didn't even know how to read and write. So then it was just really hard to take someone who hasn't gotten a proper quality education and then expect them to do all of these things in this safe way. So midwives so now they're like 40,000 midwives in Pakistan. A lot of them are not able to practice for these reasons.
Wow.
That's heartbreaking, man.
And is there a big community within the cities? Like, for example, do you have a community of midwives, or do you have like other colleagues?
So I went to school here. So I went to school in Karachi. So I do work with the school that I went to. I do often go back to them, and anytime I need to call on a pool of midwives, or even the midwife who works with me at the island that I work at my clinic, even she's from the same school. So we do know a lot of network of midwives.
Yeah, right.
But I think what ends up happening, and especially in Karachi, which is sad, is that a lot of them just end up working in hospitals as nurses because they're not able to do what it is that they needed to do.
Right. And that's, I mean, I would say that that's more because of the lack of people even knowing that they have access to midwives here. I don't think, because I know out of all of my friends, I don't think it's been a conversation amongst us ever where there is another option apart from, you know, just the regular, okay, this is the one doctor. Because what happens, especially in Karachi, what happens is, especially when you have like such small social circles, one will go to a doctor and they'll say, oh, I had a great experience. Everyone else will start flocking to the same person. But they don't actually go and educate themselves about all the other options that they have, or all the other things, hospitals that they could go to, or whatever for that. So I think it's a lack of conversation around.
Can I ask, because this could be me just kind of thinking about it, but I also feel like midwifery is obviously a female dominated, like that by nature. And I have found, again, a woman who has never given birth or has plans to anytime soon, that when the conversation has come up, there are men that I hear that are just, they kind of poo-poo at it. And they're just sort of like, well, you know, are you really going to trust her and this and that? I imagine there must be some stigma about it, because there's even stigma about female doctors, you know what I mean? And like, even though this is such a private, personal thing that like, God, we can't even talk about how this went down, they'll insist you go to a male doctor. So like, I wonder, has that come up? Like, do you feel that's a thing about it?
That people would want to go to male doctors?
Or that they wouldn't like trust a midwife for partially that reason?
I think people don't trust midwives necessarily. And a lot of it is also related to how doctors think about midwives. So that's a good point. It's, we've had we've had doctors say that, you know, like, you don't understand how unsafe it is to be doing a birth at home or to go. So, and this would be the same thing. So this is the same thing in urban settings, but also in a place like South Punjab, which is where we had this labor room, the midwives used to, so their protocol was anytime they would have some kind of complication, they obviously took her to a government hospital. And they said that whenever we would take her to the government hospital, even if it had nothing to do with us, the doctors would be like, it's because you went to a midwife. It's because she spoiled your case. And she's like, that's how. And even if women would come to the door of the facility, the guard would be like, there's no one here, you shouldn't trust this woman. So it's everywhere, right? So it's from every level that, oh, this is not necessarily a doctor, so you shouldn't go to her, because I think people don't even know what a midwife is. They don't know the services, and then there's all this mistrust and...
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing. I think the conversation is not just on the level of people getting to know what midwives are and what facilities and what services you guys offer, but it's also the cultural aspect where people will block you on purpose. But just for the sake of, well, my understanding and also for everyone else's understanding, what is it like from A to Z? What is it exactly? Like, let's break it down. What are the services that a midwife offers? Okay, so a midwife does, she would be with a woman from the point that she gets pregnant, or even, you know, preconception care, give her the kind of just nutrition, supplements, everything that she needs to have a safe, healthy pregnancy. For the 9 months. Yeah, and then when a woman is pregnant, she'll come to me. I will do a pregnancy test. I will give her the supplements she requires. And so if I talk about the clinic that I work at,
is this Mama Baby Fund?
Yes.
Yeah, you can name it. Let's go.
Yeah. So Mama Baby Fund, which is the organization that I founded, which provides free maternal health care. So the clinic that I have is at Baba Island, which is off of Karachi. It's a set of islands. And the women who come in, so they'll come to me since when they become pregnant, then they'll come back. They'll come back every month. In the end, they come around 5 to 6 times during the pregnancy. So we check on their pregnancy, do the test, check on baby, do the fetal heart sounds, gauge any kind of issues that they have anywhere in the process, and then go up to the birth process. Midwives can do normal births, they can do any stitches, any of that, any place that there's a complication, so it's actually quite clear. And there's these essential competencies of midwives globally. Right. So midwives can all do the same thing, and they also know what they're not supposed to do. So I will not take any patients who have high blood pressure, have diabetes,
High risk.
who are high risk in any way, right? And then after birth, then they come back, they come for well baby checkups, they come to me for 6 weeks for all the checks, all of that.
Right.
And then because my clinic is the only source, so I work at this island and there is no source of maternal health care. And all of these islands, and population is around 40,000. So women come from all over the coast. So then I also do some extra things. Like, I do a lot of childcare stuff, but not necessarily every midwife would do that.
And mental health when it comes to, because it's a lot of, apart from just the birthing process, the trauma that your body goes through, you also go through a lot of trauma leading up to it, after. I know a lot of mums who have had a lot of postpartum, have been through a lot. So you guys also deal with that aspect of it as well?
So postpartum depression is something that, if it's postpartum depression, I don't think the midwife is equipped to deal with it.
Right.
It would be referrals. If it's
But
in the
you can
first
clock
2
it.
weeks, yeah, absolutely. So midwife should be able to clock it. And in
Right.
the first 2 weeks, if it's just, if it's related to the hormone drops, that would be baby blues, that would be normal. And we would know when it becomes
Right.
Too much.
when it's
So you
not, it
flag it
crosses.
and
We can flag it.
tell
I
them
don't-
exactly where they can go and get the right help.
But I think postpartum depression is something, or just mental health in general,
Yeah.
especially, it's for everyone. It's so misunderstood that obviously for women and then pregnant women,
Right.
it's absolutely not understood at all. And I think women themselves cannot even believe that something like this
Yeah.
would. I have women come to me recently. In my clinic, I see a lot of women who have postpartum depression, and I think it's just so they already are going through a mental health crisis, and then their contextual factors also contribute, right? So a lot of them are going through bad economic situation, financial hardships, but also really unsupportive families.
Right.
Like I've had women who were only when their child was like 9 months old, and they realized that this kid is like a mess. The baby is like only 3 kilos and she's 9 months old. They realized they're like, oh, there's something wrong with the mother. She needs a bit of help or a bit of support. So
Right.
it's not even something that's
That was
perceived.
actually going to be my next question, is like how culture kind of plays into a role in maternal health. Honestly, from like jump to now there's literally a baby. Like, how have you seen that play out?
It's the cultural aspect of it, how we deal with all of this is it's really interesting, because I think like even when we talk about a pregnant woman making any kind of decisions around body, those decisions are never hers, right? To
Yeah.
make.
Right.
So in all aspects of my work, I see communal ownership of women's bodies. So women rarely ever make decisions about their own health. It's always like, even if you want to talk about something like family planning, you want to talk about what clothes the baby will wear, what the woman will eat after she gives birth. We have women who don't come to us they'll come to us like one day before they're going to give birth, and I'll say, where were you all of this? And now you've come in this high risk situation. And they'll say, in our community, we're not allowed to leave the house when we're pregnant. Or after birth, we'd see women who just, not recovering. It's because their family doesn't let them eat anything in the first 40 days. So no meat,
Why?
no bread, no nothing. They just get this, like, just eat broth, have broth for the first 40 days because your stomach will not go back to its place. Your uterus will not go back. So they're not even able to breastfeed.
Wait,
So
for an aesthetic reason? Or?
Yes, aesthetic
is it
reason.
aesthetics, but it's also just misunderstanding about how the body works,
No,
right?
I
A
had
lot of,
heard
like,
a-
especially I'm assuming in rural areas and stuff, they would say, okay, when a woman gets pregnant, don't take these pills, even though they're vitamins and they're good for you or whatever. Don't take these pills. Have this instead. This is the local equivalent.
Like
this, that.
bone
But
broth
there's-
or something,
Yeah, which
yeah.
in some cases it
be
works,
fine, yeah.
Yeah.
but not in every case, right?
Yeah.
So it could be that, but it could also be for aesthetic
So
reasons.
I think it's also, so it could be either of those, but I think it's gradients of how much people can make decisions for
Right.
you, right?
Yeah.
So someone, like if my mother says something to me, it's fine. But then there's also a lot of like this nefarious things that happen, and things like, women aren't allowed to breastfeed because they need to be working in the house, or the mother-in-law says, so we have a lot of cases actually of women who are forced to give their babies to people because someone else that they know didn't have a child. So, so a lot of force around those things. There's force around abortions. There's force around family planning. Then, we have women. So I've seen cases at some of the facilities I worked in where women have gotten young girls in saying that, oh, she has some kind of like, and this one case was like, this woman was like maybe 22, that she has some kind of like disability. So can you just give her a hysterectomy because, so that she doesn't like menstruate anymore. So these are the kind of decisions that people are making for women. So I don't think that...
I mean, that is literally horrible. That is so horrible that the story I'm about to say is nothing even close to that. But I was going to say, even in, I feel like in Pakistan, we like to say if there was education, it would all be fixed. But like the reality is that women's autonomy is like the enemy of our culture, apparently. I know this person who, with her husband, made the decision that they were a young couple and they did not want to have kids, like off the jump. They were like, let's get to know each other. Like we just got married. At the appointment for the IUD, the mother-in-law comes storming in and starts screaming and crying in there and said, how could you do this without me? And she was just like, how could I do this with you? Like, who are you, bro?
Yeah.
I mean, so crazy.
So and especially around these childbirth choices. So women who have we have some in the clinic at the Mama Baby Fund clinic, very particular about family planning, about contraception, that after, and some of those reasons are medical, because if you've had more than 3 C-sections, for example, there's a good chance that in your 4th one there will be some kind of like abnormal adhesions. Your placenta gets stuck to your bladder, and in the end the woman will lose her. Not only will she lose her uterus when she gives birth, a lot of times they need to cut her bladder. So it can become a very dangerous situation. And when we tell women that, look, when you give birth this time, you have to get a tubal ligation. You have to tie your tubes. They'd be like, my husband said no.
Yeah.
Because what if I don't have a son?
Very
what
common.
if I don't? Yeah.
Very common.
Yeah.
And it's not just in the rural.
No, that's
areas.
everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's every form of society. Abroad it happens. So I mean, what's to say that it won't? And those are societies where the literacy rate is a lot higher.
Yeah.
So are there any practices? Is there any innovation within like your field? Any new practices that are being adopted, or is there anything new coming up that people, just so that people know what it is that you guys do and how? I mean, it's so that it's an option for people out there.
I think the innovation around midwifery is that it's one of the oldest practices, but I think there is just so much evidence that when you go through the birthing process with a midwife, the kind of outcomes you have are actually very different. So that's your birth process is, you have a lot of times shorter period of labor. So and that again might be related to the cortisol, to being in safe environment with someone you feel safe with. I think there is evidence that says that women who go through birth with midwives, because probably of their quality of birth, they are less likely to have adverse outcomes, even things like stitches and tears and that kind of thing. Less likely to go into preterm birth because midwives watch them differently and allow them to ask questions, monitor them very closely through the birth process. And there is sometimes when someone will talk about some technology or innovation, and I think there's always this like fine line between embracing that, but then also just sticking to the sustainability of this inherently innovative practice.
Right.
Fair, yeah. Honestly, so much of this I've never heard before. I won't lie, I also run from it, but that's the problem, right? Is because I find it all so scary. But you talking about cortisol and how that gets into pain, I have never thought about that. And I'm someone with PCOS, so we think about cortisol all the time. I'd never thought about that. And you saying right now that like the complications, or at least like maybe the impacts it can have on a baby's body or your own body, is crazy, that because you're just in a much less unheard situation, I think. Like literally what you're saying, the fact that I can sit there and I know when I turn to you, I can be like, what is happening? And like, can you just tell me I'm going to be okay? And you're not going to be like,
exactly that.
Shut up, everyone has babies, and you're actually just going to talk to me.
I mean, I think so. A big part of how we were trained at this institution, and I think it's really great because I feel like everyone who has come out of this midwifery school, at least that I know of, is even when we all practiced in the same hospital, the way that the midwives dealt with women was very different. Like there would be women who would come, so there'd be a labor room and women would just be sitting there by themselves because
the fact like you've opened my mind that there's a possibility of giving birth where you can just lean over and get your question answered and not told that like you are a woman and you should already know this. So like what is it like the midwife training or all of that you get into that you learn not to be mean?
So I think that's just a very specific way that we would think that it's intuitive that no one should be mean to women who are, or any, I mean, you should be mean to anyone, but especially a woman who's going through the birthing process. Like, but when we were trained at this midwifery school, there was a lot of focus on so client-centered care, that the woman is the center of all of the services, and the basis of everything is respect and of her wishes, and just be there with her through the birth process. So when we started working in the facility, midwives would always do a lot more of, holding women's hand through the birth. A lot of times doctors would be like, what are you doing? And we'd say, no, but this is what we're trained to do. Like, hold a woman's hand, give her a back rub. She wants something, she wants water, just be there for her through the entire process. But then, so that was just something that I think was instilled in us. But then we started seeing the opposite of that. And I think that's when it really kind of shook us up and realized what happens in situations where women are not provided that care. And I think this happens, it does happen at government facilities a lot, but it also happens in private care, where, so we used to have women who would come to us from hospitals and they would tell us that the nurse over there, while I was in labor, beat me, slapped me.
Say, they do this.
What? They slap them when they're in labor. They tell them, because if you're screaming because you're in pain, they'd slap them, they'd hit them. But then there'd be things like, if you don't, they take the baby away and say that if you don't give me a tip, you won't get the baby back. I've seen situations where the person who's wheeling you back would say that, you can't have your clothes back until you give me a tip. Or the doctor will say that, you're not the same religion as me, so I'm not going to give you the proper care. Abandonment of care is a very big thing that happens. Shaming the woman through the birth process, just yelling at her, screaming at her.
Yeah.
And
I've heard this thing
is unreal, but it's just something that happens. Like, women being beaten up during the birth process is just a very normal thing.
On Twitter, remember Twitter? A lot of times, like, doctors would like kind of put up like anonymous confessions, especially young students who are now, out of their house jobs and in hospitals, or I don't even know if that's what a house job means. But I particularly remember a story that was like, this girl walked out of the hospital and like walked out of her career because she literally saw a nurse slap a girl, let's be honest. She was a teenage girl giving birth, slapped her across the face and said, "Why are you screaming? Because you want men to hear you? You're bishadam."
Yeah.
Are you out of your mind? Are you literally crazy? But this is part of the course. It's Monday at the hospital. Yeah. Is that not wild?
That is so sad to hear.
Like, they treat just, women, I mean, you shouldn't treat animals like that, but they would treat women like a
non-entity,
subhuman kind of. It's really horrific, and this would be nurses, there'd be students, there'd be doctors who would do this, do it quite regularly. And I think so I also feel like, if in a place where you don't have universal healthcare, or access is different depending on what you can and cannot afford, I think the less money you have, the more disrespect and abuse you experience too.
100%.
Not to say that women who go to hospitals, to private care, are treated well necessarily. They're also treated badly. Yeah. They're also treated quite badly.
I have a lot of friends who have had incidents and stuff where they've literally walked away feeling like, that they were not given any kind of sympathy.
Non-consensual care all the time.
The most common thing
is body shaming.
Body shaming, absolutely.
Yeah, literally. I mean, you have just, I don't think people understand, because I didn't understand this. I'm someone who was pre-med, by the way. Like, I took biology for fun. But that a child's bones, do you know where those bones come from? Your bones, your literal bone density is reduced when you are having a child, because you are forming le bébé. And then they have the audacity to body shame you within seconds of your child leaving you. And you're just laying there. I mean, you are a patient. You have gone through trauma. I feel like people act like we just give birth and then we're like, oh my God, I'm going to take this little fat baby home and everything's great. Are you insane? It makes me so angry. It's like, I wish there was a job where I just stood in the corner of hospital rooms and shouted at people who had the audacity to mess with people who have just given birth.
And
it's
so
crazy.
that thing, the disrespect and abuse is happening throughout the pregnancy. So it's happening at the hands of the healthcare providers. Then it also happens through the birth. And then when you go home, it'll continue to happen at the hands of
Your
the
family.
right?
Yeah.
So
I know of a family, it was a man actually, like, wrote this thing when his wife was having their first child. And he goes, all I can remember about birth really is that when my youngest sibling was born, my mom came home from the hospital. There was about 30 people in the house. And the first thing my dadi did was send her to the kitchen to make biryani. And he goes, I didn't know. He's like, I can't sit here and editorialize and say, like, I understood this was abuse, but it is one of the core memories of my life. And I think he himself is now a doctor, or he works in public health. Sorry, I'm forgetting. He had a doctor in front of his name, but you never know. It could be a doctorate. But the point of the story is that he was like, it traumatized me to think that, like, and I knew she was in pain. That was what he wrote. And so now that his wife was having the child, he was like, I can't even imagine what our
as
moms
part
went
of
through.
your practice with Mama Baby Fund, do you also support the family? Like, do you also give advice to the families? Do you also support the women by also advising the families as to how to go about caring for the woman who's giving birth?
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is why even in the clinic is tiny, but I'll always encourage women to bring someone along with them, especially if a mother-in-law wants to come or if a husband wants to come, we'd speak to them, because I want them to understand the process too.
Right.
I want them to understand what it is that she's going to go through, that it's not going to be as simple. And I think because we have this birth amnesia that once you've given birth, you forget, it also means that's why a lot of...
Is that an actual thing?
Apparently it is an actual thing. But when mother-in-laws, I think they also forget, right? What it is. So then, or mothers or whoever it is, they forget what it is that they went through, and then just...
no, my friends have not
Why does that
forgotten.
happen? Because of trauma, or because you're just, like, so in love with this baby?
I think it's related to your hormones.
Yeah.
It is. There was a thing where they actually, through science, proved that there's a hormone in your body that does make you forget. But I think it's also a lot more than just
like
that.
compounding.
Yeah, because my friends don't forget.
Yeah.
They remember
like,
everything, and they told me everything, and now I'm traumatized. But you are helping.
you're like, I wish I had that birthday.
Yeah. No, but this conversation is helping because there is some light at the end of all of those tunnels. There is, there are other options, and there, like, from what you've told us, there are softer, more empathetic ways of going about it, rather than you just thinking that this is my only option and this is what I have to do.
I think there are some cultural practices also that I think we look at them the right way. If they're done the right way, I think they do really support women. So for example, the postpartum process where women will often go and stay at their own homes or their mother's homes, or they're taken care of. And I think that does give women a lot of leeway to actually be able to recover, to not have to get up, to not have to work all the time, to have someone take care of her while she's recovering. But I think it's just in that whole range of cultural practices. Some favor the woman, and a lot of them
I think
don't.
even the way that, like, giving birth on your back is actually not like a cultural practice, right? Like, I believe across our cultures in our country, we were like, anyway, any shape or form, like whatever's comfortable to women. But like in the West, it's like, what? Like, how dare you go any other way? So yeah, I think we do have some of that indigenous stuff in us that's a little like,
absolutely.
I do fantasize or romanticize this long distance pass when having kids was seen as like you're doing an incredible thing, not just part of your checklist of womanhood,
I mean,
personhood.
Just to end on a positive note, and after all the trauma that we've been through collectively through this podcast, is there any, because I want more people to get into doing what you do, is there any advice that you would give to other young girls out there, and also kind of to follow this kind of a path, or to even choose this kind of a path?
So, I mean, I think I love midwifery. I think what was interesting for me was that I used to work at a facility, and I would get up and go to the hospital. And, it's part of your training that I'd get there and I'd like make 40 beds, that I'd check like 50 women's blood pressure. And I was like, but I'm really tired, but I just really look forward to going to work every day. And I think it's just being part of this like magical process with women, being involved in this transformative thing that's happening to them and kind of celebrating with them. And there's obviously a lot of loss, there's a lot of tragedy. You're there with them in that also. And I remember once there was this woman, I had been there through the birth, and then I saw her in the postpartum in the ward, and then when she was leaving, I went to say bye to her, and she like put this like dairy milk in my pocket, and she was like, thank you for being so kind to me. And I was like, okay, so that's it.
That's the thing. You're there in a much more intimate setting, I feel.
Like
than
a friend.
with doctors, they just come in, do their thing, and leave. But you're there from A to Z to even beyond Z, which I think it's beautiful. I think it's a really and something that I will definitely think about.
Yeah, no, I think it's like midwifery. I think in many ways has like set me free, and I would really advocate for it.
Sorry, the last thing, Mama Baby Fund. How can people help, be involved, all that good stuff?
So Mama Baby Fund is basically an organization that I started while I was training to be a midwife, because I just saw a lot of gaps in financial gaps that women and their families experience in the birthing process. So I founded this organization. It started as a small friends and family fund, and then it just kind of grew. And now we serve like thousands of women and families every year. And why it really needs to exist is, I'll just share one really quick case about that. Mama Baby Fund is turning 9 this year.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, sometimes we have cases which really make me think about how important our work is, where one of the things that we really, really need in this country is quality neonatal ICU care and pediatric ICU, and it doesn't exist. And because the demand is so high and government hospitals can only do so much, you have to turn to private care, and private care is quality private care is extremely expensive. So recently we came across this baby, and what we do when we find cases, we would fund them. So we found this baby who, when she came to us, she's 5 months old, and she had been turned away from 8 hospitals by the time she reached us, because half of them said that we don't want her because she's very sick and we don't want to increase our mortality. And the other half said we don't have enough space. And government hospitals, if you go to a government hospital, I could almost give a 99% guarantee they'd say we don't have space, because they actually don't have space.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then when we took her to the 10th hospital, we paid for her care, and she just came back to my clinic last week, and she had come with mithai, and the mother was like, my husband and I, by the time we reached the 9th hospital, he asked me, he was like, where will we bury her? Oh. And she's alive. They were like, we can't even believe it. And I think that is the power of an organization that kind of plugs those gaps that many people don't even know exist. But yeah, anyone can check out our work. We do a lot of cases and sharing all of our work on our social media, on our Instagram, on Facebook.
All will be linked.
Anyone who'd like to be involved can learn more about it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I'm like emotional. I'm like, I'm so happy.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an excellent story to end on. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for teaching us so much.
Yeah.
Things that I honestly can say I had no idea about.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. I think people don't know this, and I think it's important for them to learn, to know all of it.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. This one's so much happier. I was like weeping in that last one. Thank you so much for coming. To learn more about the Mama Baby Fund, please check out the links below. Make sure you follow them on social media. They're doing incredible work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay. Bye, guys.